In the mid-1840s, two Englishmen, Tom Cody Ponting and his partner Washington Malone, along with a third member of their team, came up with an ambitious idea. They wanted to drive a herd of Texas Longhorn cattle all the way to New York City. Their plan was to buy and sell cattle, carefully saving up their earnings so they could make their way to Texas, purchase a herd of Longhorns, and then embark on an unprecedented cattle drive, bringing the herd from Texas to New York. There has never been an achievement like this one before. However, fate had other plans. In 1845, a hoof-and-mouth disease outbreak in England, along with the repeal of the Corn Laws and the Irish potato famine, forced them to change their course. Ponting and his brother John ended up making an early journey to the United States, setting sail on a 6-week voyage. By 1853, the resourceful Ponting brothers and Washington Malone had saved up enough $50 gold coins to buy a herd of Texas Longhorns. While John stayed back in Illinois, Tom and Malone set off for Texas. Concerned about carrying so much gold, they hid it in small leather money belts sewn into their suspenders, worn between two shirts for added security. Their journey began in St. Louis, and from there, they traveled on horseback, covering about 30 miles a day. For around 50 cents per day, they paid for supper, a bed, breakfast, and feed for their horses. They continued riding south through Springfield, Missouri, and Louisiana, before eventually reaching Texas. Once there, they hired a cook, bought a wagon, some canvas for a cover, and a pair of oxen. Then, they started asking around about where to buy cattle. Interestingly, Ponting also wanted to purchase a herd of hogs. When asked why, he explained that he planned to feed them corn and estimated he'd need about 3 hogs for every 2 steers. His idea was that the cattle would eat the corn, and the hogs would feed on the corn left in the cattle's droppings as they made their way along the trail. One Texan remarked, "Well, I always knew you Yankees were frugal, but I never thought you'd try to fatten hogs on the same feed as your cattle." Rancher Jesse Chisholm, who owns acreage in the Choctaw Bottoms near Sherman, was assisting the men in gathering their herd. Chisholm, born in Tennessee, was an Indian trader, interpreter, and guide who had grown up around Fort Gibson in eastern Oklahoma. He would establish a path that would eventually be known as the Chisholm Trail in 1865, connecting what is now Oklahoma City with Kansas. Back then, a steer that cost $8 to $12 in Texas could sell for $80 to $100 in New York City. With Chisholm's help, they purchased 700 head of Texas cattle and drove them across the Red River, heading north on a journey of over 2,000 miles to New York. The trip took more than a year. Ponting later wrote about his nervousness crossing Indian territory, but the greatest challenge they faced was navigating the dangerous rivers along the way. They crossed the Mississippi River at St. Louis, and Ponting sold some of the cattle in Ohio, reducing the herd to about 150 head. In Indiana, they loaded the remaining cattle onto a train, then unloaded them in Cleveland before continuing on the Erie Railroad into New York. By the time they reached New York City, they had 135 head of cattle. The people of New York had never seen Texas Longhorns before. These tough, long-legged cattle had walked about 1,500 miles and traveled another 600 miles by rail. Ponting later became a wealthy cattleman, shipping cattle from Abilene, Kansas to Chicago, New York, and even overseas to England and Holland.